Hilchus Tumas Meis Perek Chamishis. Until now, we were learning of how a mess is matame. There was a mess shalom is matame b'mago b'masa u'be'oil and al derech certain parts of the mess. A kizayis basim in a mess and evim in a mess is matame b'mago b'masa u'be'oil. The certain parts of the mess that's only matame b'mago b'masa, like an etzem kiseira. Certain parts of the mess that's only matame b'masa u'be'oil, like for example mlechafnayim of rokov. So there's very different of how a mess brings tumah, conveys tumah. Now here we're learning about the dinam of the dvarim hamistamim in a mess. What level of tumah does it get when it becomes tumah from the mess? Now generally, just maybe a little akdama. Generally, we have the general rule is that there's an ava tumah and there's a vlada tumah. An ava tumah is something which is a main source of tumah. That's we'll learn behamshel the dinam of avis atumas. And an ava tumah is matami odem v'kelim. And the Adam V'Kelim that becomes Tami from an Avatuma becomes a Vlada Tuma. Now an Avatuma could be Matami Adam V'Kelim. A Vlada Tuma could only be Matami Oichlin or Mashkin. A Vlada Tuma can be Matal V'Kelim. So generally there's an Avatuma, and when an Avatuma comes into contact with something which is Makabal Tuma, like an Adam V'Kelim, so the Adam V'Kelim becomes a Vlada Tuma. That's general din. Now B'negei mess, there's a Chidush that a mess is not only an Avatuma, it's an Avi Avoisa Tuma, which means that when something comes into contact with the mess, so that thing becomes an avatuma. It not only becomes a vladatuma, like a normal tummy, which causes something to become a vladatuma, by a mess, if a mess touches adam or kelim, not oichlin and mashkin, but if a mess touches an adam or a keli, so then the adam or the keli become an avatuma. They become an avatuma, and also that they're chayiv to have. In other words, they can't just go to the mikveh and become tummy that night, like a normal avatuma which touches on Adam or Kalim. So then he's toivel and herav shemesh nistor. Over here he has to have azor shlishi u'shvi, and only on the shvi that's when he's toivel, and at the end of the shvi that's when he becomes completely tor. So that's the chiluk. In other words, someone that becomes tummy from a mess becomes an avatuma, and he also becomes tummy shlishi u'shvi. That's the general din. A mess is an avi avesatuma, so memela the Adam and Kalim that come into contact with him become an avatum. However, there's a special din that a mess that comes into, there's two special dinim. There's two chidush dikadinim. One chidush dikadin is that when a mess comes into contact with a keli, and the Rambam holds any keli, others learn only a kli barzel, but the Rambam holds any keli. If a mess touches a keli, so that keli has a din of an avia veisatuma in the sense that keli, when it touches something else, it also makes him into an avatuma. So if that keli is going to touch an adam, so that adam will become an avatuma. Again, normally you would say, since the mess is navia vesatuma, so let's say if a mess touches an adam, so the adam becomes an avatuma, and that adam needs hazor shlishi u'shvi. Now when that adam touches a second adam, so that adam now became tummy from an avatuma, so he's a vladatuma. And the second adam doesn't need any more hazor shlishi u'shvi. He's not tummy in that madrega of an adam that touched the mess. He's rather tummy in a tumah like a regular person that touched an avatuma. Like if you touch a sheretz, just like if you touch a sheretz, you would become a vladatuma. So there is an adam that touched the mess. So the mess was an avia vesatuma. The adam was an avatuma. And now when the adam touches another adam, so he becomes a rishon l'tumah. Now here there's a chidush that if a mess touches a keli, if a mess touches a keli, so this keli doesn't only become a regular avatuma, and memela now this keli is going to convey to become a rishon l'tumah. That keli gets a din like an avia vesatuma. In somewhat it becomes a din like an avia vesatuma, and therefore when the keli touches an adam or a keli, so now that adam becomes an avatuma. So now the adam or the keli becomes an avatuma. And since the adam and the keli becomes an avatuma, so now they could themselves be matami adam v'kelim. So that's the chiddush. And when they're matami on adam v'kelim, so those adam v'kelim are also tami tuma shiva. Just like the mess when he touched the adam, so that adam when he became an avatuma, so he became tami tuma shiva. So the same thing when the mess touches a keli, so now that keli becomes like an avia vesatuma. So now when he touches the adam v'keli, so then that adam v'keli also becomes an avatuma. He becomes an avatuma, and he also needs azor shlishi u'shvi. So that's chiddush number one. Chiddush number one is that when a mess touches a keli, So that keli now can go ahead and become a din of an avia vesatuma. He's not just an avatum, he's like an avia vesatuma, and he can go ahead and be metame adam v'kelim, and that adam v'kelim now needs hazor shlishi shvi, as if that adam v'kelim touched the original mess. That's din number one. Now there's also another din. There's another din that with an adam touches a keli, when an adam touches a keli, when an adam touches a mess. So now this adam, as we said before, became an avatuma. He became an avatuma because he touched a mess, and the mess is an avia vesatuma. Now, when this adam is going to go and touch a keli, so the pashtus would be, the rule would be, when an avatuma touches a keli, the keli becomes a rishon l'tuma. But over here, there's another chiddush with a keli. The chiddush is that when the keli touches the person that touched the mess, that keli gets the din of the adam, and the keli himself has a din of the adam. So the keli becomes himself also an avatuma, and that keli himself also needs azor shlishi u'shvi. So notice when you become an avatuma, behamshach to a mess, so you need azor shlishi u'shvi. So we have two chidushim with a keli. We have the first chiddush is, the Rambam says it in the other order actually, but we have one chiddush is that cherev areu kecholol, so that when a keli touches a mess, so the keli gets the din of a mess. So now when this keli is going to go ahead and touch a person or a keli, so that adam and keli is going to become an avatuma. He's not going to become like a rishon l'tuma. He's going to become an avatuma, and he's going to need hazor shlishi u'shvi. That's din number one. And din number two, that was talking about when the keli touched the mess. Now we're learning din number two, when the keli touches an adam that touched the mess. So now this adam which touched the mess is doch an avatuma, and he needs azor shlishi u'shvi. So the pashtus would be that when this adam touches a keli, so now that keli should become a rishon l'tuma, and shouldn't have a din of azor shlishi u'shvi, should become a rishon l'tuma. So here we learn out of a pasuk, like the Rambam will bring the pasuk, that the keli that touched a person, that touched a mess, also becomes like the adam, and it becomes an avatuma. So we have a keli touching a mess that becomes an avia vesatuma, and then we have a keli that touched an adam which touched a mess. So then that keli becomes again an avatuma. That becomes an avatuma. So it's two chidushim. And then there's another chidush that these two chidushim could be combined. You can't keep going, but you can be combined once. So in other words, if you have the mashal a keli, that keli touched the adam, touched the mess. I'm sorry. So that keli now has a din of an avia vesatuma. And when it's going ahead and be matami adam or keli, so that adam or keli is going to have a din of an avatuma. It's going to be it's not like going to have a din like something normally that touched an avatuma, because the keli that touched the mess has a din of an avia vesatuma, and now that adam that touched that keli has a din of an avatuma. Now we learned before that when an adam touched the mess and he became an avatuma, and then a keli touches this adam, so that keli also becomes an avatuma. So over here again, so now we can have the keli touch the adam. So that was the keli had a din of an avia vesatuma. Now this keli touched the keli touched the mess. The keli touched the mess. So the keli had a din of an avia vesatuma. Now this keli went ahead and touched an adam, and he made this adam into an avatuma, because the keli touched the adam. The keli had a din of an avia vesatuma. It made this adam into an avatuma, and now this adam also needs azor shlishi u'shvi. He has a din like an avatuma that came from a mess, as if he would have touched the mess himself. Now this adam went ahead and touched the keli. This adam went ahead and touched the keli. So l'chura, so the adam was the avatuma, and he touched the keli. But we learned before that when the adam touched the mess, and then he touches a keli, so the keli also has the din of an avatuma, which we learn out from a pasuk. So now we're learning that an adam that touched the keli, that touched the mess, and now this adam went ahead and touched another keli. So that keli also has a din of an avatuma, and that keli also needs azor shlishi u'shvi. So it comes out that we have the adam we have originally the keli that touched the mess, and then we have the adam that touched the keli that touched the mess, and then we have the keli that touched the adam that touched the keli that touched the mess, and all three of them, side the original keli which touched the mess, inside the adam which touched the keli that touched the mess, inside the keli which touched the adam that touched the keli that touched the mess. All three of them have a din of an avatuma, and all three of them have a din of azor shlishi u'shvi, which is a chiddush. This is a chiddush within Hilchis Tumas Meis gufa. So that the Rambam says in it. This the Rambam says basically in the first few halachas. Peirik Hamishi. Kol ha'metam in machmas hames. Anything that becomes tummy because of the mess, bein adam bein keli, if it becomes tummy as a result of touching the mess, whether with oil, or maga. So either way, being Adam and Kalim is Tmeim Tumas Shiva. So they become Tommy Tumas Shiva. Ketzad. Adam and Keli Shenoga Bidvarim Shemitam and Ames B'maga. There's those things of the mess that are only Mitame B'maga. So if a person or a Keli touch those things that are Mitame Min Ames B'maga, for example, it touched an Etzem Keseda, Shenitma Ba'oil, or the Adam or the Keli became Tommy Ba'oil, the Echad Midvarim Shemitame Ba'oil, from one of those things of the mess, which are Mitame Ba'oil, like an Eva Min Ames that has Basar which Maila Aruka, or Basar Min Ames, V'chein, that's another thing. V'chein Adam, Shenosa Dvarim Shemitam Min Ames B'masa. Now we learned before that Tumas Masa is only shaykhs by Adam. A Keli can't become Tomei from the mess with Tumas Masa. The Adam that's carrying the mess, or the part of the mess, he becomes Tomei. So V'chein Adam Shenosa Dvarim Shemitam Min Ames B'masa is Hakel Tmeim Tumas Shiva. All these things that became Tomei from the mess. Either it became Tomei from the mess from Maga, from those things that are only Matame B'maga, or it became Tomei from the mess oil, or it became Tomei from the mess B'masa, the person became Tomei B'masa, is always Akel Tmei and Tumas Shiva. Shenamar, Kol Habo La'el, V'chol Asher Ba'oil, Yitmu Shivas Yom. So we learn now that Tumas El is Matame Shivas Yom, V'al Derezeh Tumas Maga U'masa is Matame Shivas Yom. Halacha Beis. Now, Adam Shnitma B'mes, a person that became Tomei B'mes, and now the Kalim Sheyiga Bem Adam Zeh. So this Adam that became Tomei from the mess, as we said before, he has a Tumas Shiva. The Pashas Advarim, you would think that now that he became Tomei from the mess, so he's only an Avatum, and he's going to touch something else. So that something else will become a Rishon L'Tumah, and that's Taka the Din. If he touches L'Moshel an Adam, so that Adam has a Din of a Rishon L'Tumah. But here there's the Chiddush, Adam Shnitma B'mes, and then the Kalim Sheyiga Bem Adam Zeh, this person that touched the mess, now the Kalim touched him. So the din is these Kalim are also Tmeim Tumas Shiva. It's a Chiddush that these Kalim have the same din like the other. They're Tomei Tumas Shiva. Shnama v'chibastem bigdeichem bayim hashvi utartem. And over there we're talking about a person that became Tomei b'mes, and now he was wearing begodim, and those begodim need kibus shivas yom, which means, so we see from here that even the begodim that touched the Adam, that touched the mess, also becomes Tomei shivas yom, which basically means it has a din of an avatuma. Aval Adam, that would be only if Kalim touched an Adam that touched the mess. Aval Adam, Shenoga Ba'Adam Shnitma B'mes. It wasn't a Keli that touched the Adam, but it was rather an Adam, Shenoga Ba'Adam Shnitma B'mes. It ben Shenoga Be'acha Shapir Shem Matamav. Whether he touched him after he already is no longer touching the mess. Ben Shenoga Be'Kshu Adayin Negei B'mes. Even if he's touching, a person is touching another person, which is presently touching a mess, is nevertheless, as Hashemi, the second person, is Tomei Tumas Erev. He's only Tomei Tumas Erev. He's touching an Avatuma. Shenamar v'hanefesh hanigas titma ado erev. A person that touches a Tmei mess, someone that touched the mess, is Tomei ado erev. Now Zeh Dintera, that's the Dintera. Natera, there's no difference if you're still attached. If the first person is still attached to the mess, and the second person is touching him while he's still touching the mess, or he's no longer touching the mess. Either way, the second person doesn't become Tomei Tumas Shiva. He only becomes Tomei Tumas Erev. Avol Midivri Seif Midrabanon is hanegeh b'mes v'noga ba'odam acher v'adayin hu mechuber b'mes. If a person touches a person, someone is touching a mess, and then another person is touching this person, and the original person that's touching the mess is still touching the mess, so the then is shneim tmeim Tumas Shiva. They're both tmeim Tumas Shiva, and the mele, all the consequences of being Tomei Tumas Shiva also arrive. And knows he's Matame Kalim, etc., etc. Uki'ilu noga zeh hasheni b'mes atzmi. So we're giving him a din. Since he was touching a person that was touching a mess, he has a din as if he was touching the mess itself. So maybe he's Tomei Tumas Shiva, and he has a din of an avatuma. What din do we say that he has a din? Someone that's a person that's touching a person that's presently touching a mess becomes Tomei Tumas Shiva. What din? That is, for 7 days he's now leading Truma V'Kachim, and anything that he touches, it'll be Matami Truma V'Kachim. He'll have a din of an Avatuma, Legabi, all dinim of Truma V'Kachim, as if he would have touched the mess itself. Avol Nazir, the din is a Nazir that became Tomei mess, a Nazir that became Tomei mess. If a Nazir would have touched the mess, so then he's Megalef. There's a whole din of Taglachas of a Nazir because he touched the mess. Now a Nazir that touched the person that was touching a mess, Be'emes, he didn't really touch a mess. He only touched a person that touched the mess. So Mele Legabi HaNazir, we don't give him the din like he's Neger b'mes. and also uleisa Pesach, someone that has to be makriv a korban Pesach. So if he's tummy to Mashiva, so maybe he can be makriv a korban Pesach, he's still tummy mes. Masha'inkin, if he's only tummy Tumas Erev, so he could go ahead and be makriv the korban Pesach that night or the following night. I'll call upon him. So legabi Tumas Pesach, we don't say that he has a din like tummy to Mashiva, and therefore he's not going to be able to bring a korban Pesach like a tummy mes. Legabi that the Rabbanon didn't institute this tuma of Tumas Bichiburin. In other words, again, a person that's touching a mess. So minatera, this person, the second person that's touching, is only tummy to Maserev. He has a regular din of person touching an avatuma. Midir Rabbanan, he has a din as if he touched the mess because he's touching the mess Bichiburim of this other person. So legabi Hilchis Nazir and legabi Hilchis Pesach, the Rabbanan didn't institute that takon. So Mela, so Avul Nazir Uleisa Pesach, Baby Shas Chibur Ben Achash Pirish, there's any tummy or to Naserev, he only tummy to Maserev Kidin Ter. So till now we learned the din that an Adam that touched the mess, and then Kalim touched that Adam, so those Kalim have a din of Tumas Shiva. That's a special din. Kalim have a din of Tumas Shiva because they touched an Adam that touched the mess, and that's a din we learn now from V'chibastem Bigdechem Bayem Ashvi Utahartem. Halacha Gimel. So till now we learned that Kalim that touched an Adam that touched the mess, so the Adam that touched the mess became an Avatuma, and he's Tomei Tumas Shiva because he became Tomei from the mess. So al derez is a chidush that the Kalim that touched this Adam which touched the mess also has this din of an Avatuma, and it's Metami Tumas Shiva. That's we learned the din V'chibastem Bigdechem Utahartem, that someone that touched the mess, so his begodim also need Hazor Shlishi Ushvi. Now we're going to learn the din, the second din that we mentioned before, that Kalim that touched the mess have a din of the mess itself. Till now we were speaking about that the Kalim that touched the Adam that touched the mess has a din like the Adam that touched the mess. Now we're learning that the Kalim that touched the mess have a din of the mess itself. Kalim shenitmu b'mess. Kalim that became tummy with the mess. How did they become tummy? Ben b'maga, ben b'oil. Is harei hein l'negeh behem k'negeh b'mess atzmi. So in the Pashtus Advarim, you would say, since something touched the mess was an aviyah ve'satuma, so it was metami, whatever it is, the begodim or the Adam, the Keli or the Adam, also a Tumas Shiva, but now this Mashalif would be an Adam. An Adam touches a mess. So he becomes Tomei Tumas Shiva. Now when he touches another Adam, so that Adam only is a Vlada Tumah. He's like an Adam that touched an Avatum, and he's a Vlada Tumah. He's not Tomei Tumas Shiva, and he can't be Metami Kalim Adam v'Kalim. He's a regular Vlada Tumah. He's a Rishon Tumah. So the Seichel would be Al Derech Zeh, if you have a Keli to touch the mess, so that Keli became also an Avatuma, became an Avatuma, and now when it touches something else, so that something else should become a Rishon L'Tumah. So that's the Chiddush over here. The Chiddush over here, that the Keli that touched the mess has the din of the mess itself. It has the din of an Aviyah Ve'Satuma. So now when this Keli is going to touch an Adam or a Keli, so that Adam or Keli is going to have a din again of an Avatuma, and has become Tomei Tumas Shiva. Just like we had before, that a Keli that touches an Adam that touched the mess. So he has the din of that Adam. So in here we're talking about if the Keli touched the mess itself, it has the din of the mess itself. Nachamal. Kalim shenitmu b'mess. Kalim that became tummy with the mess. How did it become tummy with the mess? Ben b'maga, ben b'oil. It can't become tummy with noisei because the noisei is only by an Adam. Ben b'maga, ben b'oil. So then harei hein l'niger b'hen. So something that's going to touch this Keli which touched the mess is k'niger b'mess atzmi. It's as if that something which is touching this Keli which touched the mess, as if that would have touched the mess itself. What does it mean? Just like it would touch the mess itself. Ma mess, mitame hanigebe. Just like if something touches the mess, bein adam bein kalim. So what kind of tumah does it become? It becomes tumah shiva. Is av kalim shenitmu b'mess. The kalim that became tummy with the mess is heim v'hakalim or ya adam sheigam inside the original kalim which touched the mess. Inside the adam and the kalim which are going to touch these kalim that touch the mess are all going to become tmeim tumah shiva. So in other words, the din is that the keli gets the din of the mess itself. Just like we learned before, that the keli gets the din of the avatuma, the adam, which touched the mess. Shenamar b'chalal cherev b'mes. So we learn out a limud, mipi ashmul lomdu shacherev kimes. That the cherev has the din of the mess. That's what we learn out chalal cherev. That the cherev has the din of the chol. Now some Rishonim learn that it's special din by a cherev, special din by a klimatchis. And the Ram learns that it's not special din by a klimatchis. It's a din hu adin all the kelim. Hu adin l'shar kelim ben klimatchis. Ben klishetev, all ubgadim, all kalim, as long as those kalim could be toivel, you could be toivel. As we'll soon learn, that if mashal a klicheres, which is not something which you could be toivel, gets tummy from a mess, so then there's not going to be the din of cherev areu kechol. Over there's not going to be the din. But any keli which you could be table, that means bil klishetev, a table which you could be table, ubgadim, so all of them becomes tummy and it gets the tum of the mess. That's like cherev areu kechol has a din of the chol itself. That refers not only to a cherev, but any keli which touches a mess. And harei weimen noch haraya, the pasuk says, kol heirig nefesh v'chol negeh b'chol. So if someone that's a heirig nefesh and a negeh b'chol has this din of being tummy to Mashiach. Now what does heirig nefesh mean? So on that the Rambam says, v'chisala al daitcha shezeh yorak chetz v'horak. This person just threw a chetz and he killed, or zorak even v'horak, and he never came into any contact with the mess. Is nit Meshivas Yom? He's going to become tummy Meshivas Yom. The Rambam says that's not something which is you cannot accept such a zach. Ella. So when it says heirig nefesh, or heirig nefesh b'cherev u'kiyetzeba. So what does it mean heirig nefesh? It means he killed him with a sword, which means he was attached. He was touching the keli that touched the mess. Ella heirig nefesh b'cherev u'kiyetzeba mipnei shenitma b'nigiyasi b'keli sheharig b'y. Shari noga keli b'mess. So since the keli touched the mess, so therefore he becomes tummy by touching this keli which touched the mess. So that's this new chiddush that a keli that touches a mess and now something touches this keli. Comes, so then that new thing also becomes Tomei Tumas Shiva, as if he would have touched the mess itself. Uminayin Shafa Kalim Hanoga Ba'adam Shanoga B'Kalim Shenitmu B'Mes. So now we're going to have the combination of these two dinim, because we had a din before that Kalim Shanoga Ba'adam Shanoga B'Mes, so that gets the din of the Adam, so it becomes an Avatum. Now we're learning that a Kalim Shanoga B'Mes gets the din of an aviyavesatum. It gets the din of an aviyavesatum, so something is going to touch the kalim that touched the mess, gets the din of an avatum. Now what will be in a case where you want to combine both dinim? In other words, the kalim touched the mess, and then the adam touched the keli, and then the keli touched the adam, which touched the keli that touched the mess. So here the Rambam is going to say that all three of them need hazosh lishishvi. That's what the Rambam is saying. Minayin sha'afa kalim hanegim ba'adam, which shenoga b'kelim, shenitmu b'mes. So there's three things that are extending from the mess. The kelim touched the mess, the adam touched the kelim, and then the kelim touched that adam. So how do we know that all three of them are tomeim tumas shiva? Shariweim v'chibastim b'gdeichem v'yimashvi otartem. So in that lashon, v'chibastim b'gdeichem v'yimashvi otartem is referring to also to a person that touched the cherev. No, it's not only to someone that touched the actual mess, someone that touched the cherev, which touched the mess, and then now he became tamei. And now his begodim are also tummy, so that's the kelim. Shenogu ba'adam, shenogu b'kelim, shenogu b'mes. His whole amadata, shekol adam atome to mashiva. Anyone that's tummy to mashiva is also mitame begodim to mashiva. So an adam which is tummy to mashiva, which is what kind of adam is tummy to mashiva? Either the adam that touched the original mess, or the adam that touched the keli that touched the mess. So that adam which is tummy to mashiva. So he's metame begodim to mashiva. So in other words, if a keli would touch the original keli, because you have a keli that touched the mess, and now a keli would touch that keli. So that keli, both keli would be tummy to mashiva, but then it won't be extended. There won't be any extension. Because the extension of a keli is tummy like an adam. A keli that touched the adam is tummy like the adam. Now what kind of adam? So either an adam that touched the mess, or an adam that touched the keli that touched the mess. If you have a keli that touched the keli, so the original keli is an avat. It became like an aviyavesatuma because it touched the keli, it touched the mess, and then the keli that touches that keli gets a din of an avatuma. And now, if anything touches that keli, whether an adam or kelim, it becomes a rishon l'tumah. Is the mitzvah same halacha dal? So the Rambam is making a sikul. Mitzvah same. Adam shenoga b'mes. If you have an adam that touches a mess. And then v'adam ba'adam acher, and that this adam goes ahead and touches another person. So Harishin is Tomei Tumas Shiva because he touched the mess. V'asheni Tumas Erev because the second adam touched an avatuma. And the second adam touched an avatuma. The first adam that touched the mess was a din of an avatuma, which means he's a din of, he's mitami shlishi ushvi because he became tummy from a mess. And the second adam became tummy from a tmei mess. So he's only Tumas Erev. That's what we learned before. That a tmei mess is matami tumas erev. That's Benegea Adam that touched the mess, and then an Adam touched the Adam. Now, however, Kalim Hanogim a mess, if you have Kalim that touched the mess, and then the Kalim, and then the Kalim touched the original Kalim that touched the mess, is Shneim Tamem Tumas Shiva. The first Kalim is Tamei Tumas Shiva because it touched the mess, but now it has a din of an Avi Avesa Tuma, so the second Kalim is also Tamei Tumas Shiva, but that doesn't go any further. Aval Ashlishi, but the third one, after the second Kalim, Bein Odom Ben Kalim, is only Tamei Tumas Erev. Now, Kalim Hanogim Ba'ames, if you have Kalim that touched the mess, and now the Adam B'Kalim, and now the Adam touched those Kalim that touched the mess. The Adam touched the Kalim that touched the mess, and now the Kalim B'Adam, and now the Kalim touched the Adam. So we say Shloshtem Tmeim Tumas Shiva. All three are Tamei Tumas Shiva. They're all three are Tamei Tumas Shiva because the first one is touched the mess, obviously Tamei Tumas Shiva. The Adam that touched the Keli, because the Keli had a din of an Avi Avesa Tuma, so is also Tamei Tumas Shiva. And now that Keli that touches the Adam, because the Keli gets the din of the Adam. That's the din of V'chibasti Bigdeichem Utahartem. After the fourth, after those three, the Keli, the Adam, the Keli, so the fourth, whatever it is, that Keli at the end could be Matami Adam V'Kelim. But it can't be Matami Adam V'Kelim Tumas Shiva. V'Revi, Bein Adam V'Kelim, is only Tamei Tumas Erev. So that's this din, basically the din of Cherev Arei Kachol, and also the din that the Keli has a din of the Adam when the Adam is Tamei Tumas Shiva. Now the Rambam holds that this din, now the Rambam B'chlal holds that there's even things that are really on a Midiraisic level, which is a Kabbalah, Beishmi Sinai, or we learn now from Limudim, but nevertheless, since it's something which is not Mefurish because of, it doesn't have a din of a din Teira, and therefore the Oinshim or different consequences that come as a result of din Teira doesn't apply here. And that the Rambam holds over here as well. This whole din that we're saying, that Cherev Arei Kachol, and Al Derech Zeh, that the Keli that touches an Adam has a din of the Adam, that, all these dinim are only Legabi Truma V'Kachim. Legabi, the Isser of eating Truma V'Kachim, the person has din of Tumah, and therefore he needs Azosh Shlishi Shvi, and all the dinim are in regards to Truma V'Kachim. Ava L'chayis Koris, L'chayiv Koris Al Bias Mikdash, Al Chilas Kachim. So Legabi, this din of becoming Koris, Chayiv Koris, for going into the Beis HaMikdash or eating Kachim, Eini Chayiv Al Harishim B'Vad, only the first two that touches the mess, Harishim, Shenoga B'Mes, that's obviously the Rishon that touches the mess becomes Tamei, and also V'Hasheni Shenoga B'Me, just like anyone that touches an Avatuma, so becomes Tamei, Memeli is also to go into Beis HaMikdash, and he's also to eat Kachim, so Al Derech Zeh, the Sheni Shenoga B'Me, the second one, which becomes Takarishim L'Tumah, but a Rishon Tumah is also usher to go into the Beis HaMikdash. V'Hasheni Shenoga B'Me Kidin Teira, Shnema V'Chila Shehiga B'Atamei Yitma. Anyone that the tummy touches becomes tummy. If you go ahead and touch kalim, which were nagu ba'adam, so really be'etzem, this is on a pashita level, without this special limud, the kalim shenogu ba'adam are only a rishon l'tum. The kalim that knows the adam that touched the mess became anavatum. The kalim that touched the adam without the special limud became a rishon l'tum. Those kalim can go ahead and be matami another adam. So even though B'amis were saying they could, because of the special limud, so that special limud only works, the Gabi the Isser, the Gabi Kachim, the Gabi Truma, over there it works. But with the Gabi that should be Chayiv for Bias Migdash, you should have a din Tumah, and should have a din that these Kalim, which will Nagu Ba'adim, have a din of Tumah, and therefore someone is going to touch those Kalim, he's going to become Tummy, and if he goes into the Beis HaMikdash, he's going to be Chayiv Karas, we don't say. Avol Negeh B'Kalim Shnogu Ba'adim, or Yanegeh Ba'adim, Shnogu B'Kalim, Shnogu B'Mes, also, is pater, because we don't consider the Adam that Shnoga B'Kelim, Shnoga B'Mes as being an Avatumas, even though the Chura Cherev Arei Kechol is a limud, and therefore, so the Chura, the Adam Shnoga B'Mes, the Adam Shnoga B'Kelim, Shnoga B'Mes, is the Chura an Avatuma, and Memela, the Adam Shnoga B'Adam, Shnoga B'Mes, should also have a din of a Tumah, but nevertheless, we don't say, oh yeah, Negeh B'Adam, Shnoga B'Kelim, Shnoga B'Mes, is pater, K'mishabiyanu B'Hilchus B'Yis Migdosh, that these things are, don't, even though there's a limud and it's a part of Teresh Shemal Peh, but nevertheless they don't have bearing legabi the din oinshim, which are only things that are mefurish b'teira. Shadvarim al elu Ram Taichus clearly afal pi shein divrei Kabbalah einon din teira. They don't have a din of a din teira. Shaharei li nisparshu b'teira elazeh shenitma b'mes yuav. This is this din of someone that was touched a mess, So he could be Matami Adam V'Kelim, and he has a din of Tumas Shiva. That says clearly. V'Hasheni Anigeh Be'Shu Rishon Shalei Nisparsha B'Teira Elazeh Shnitma B'Meshuav, and V'Hasheni Shnigeh Be'Shu Rishon Bein Adam V'Kelim. So that is Nisparsha B'Teira, that a person could become Tamei from this Avatuma, which is Nagamas. That says clearly in the Torah. But on the other end, he becomes Tamei, but it doesn't mean he becomes Tamei al Avatuma. He becomes Tamei and he becomes a Rishon L'Tuma. And that person could not go any further and be Matami Adam V'Kelim. Is Nachamo. So Minat Torah, the only ones that could become Tamei, Tumas Shiva, is something that touched the mess. Something that touched the mess has a din of Tumas Shiva, and Memela has a din of an Avatuma. Something that came into contact with that Avatuma, it'll have a din of a Rishon L'Tuma, Minat Torah. Regardless if the original thing that touched the mess was a Keli, if the thing that touched the Adam that touched the mess was also was a Keli, it makes no difference. It is only the first is an Avatuma and Mitame Tumas Shiva, that says clearly in the Torah, and what he touches is also Tummy, but it's not Tummy as an Avatuma. It becomes Tummy als a Vladatuma. And then Mela, it can be extended further into Adam V'Kelim. Halacha Vov. Now we said before that a Keli that touches a mess becomes an Avatuma. It's Tummy Tumas Shiva, and it has a din of Tummy Tumas Shiva. Kli Cheres, I'm saying Kli Cheres Shenoga B'Mes. A klicheres which touches a mess, however, it doesn't have any special dinim of tumah. Over here is ve'enim etami li adam v'lei klicheres acher v'lei sharkel. Just like a klicheres could become tummy from a sheretz, so the same thing a klicheres could become tummy from a mess. But normally, when you say a keli becomes tummy from a mess, it becomes tummy to mashiva. It has a din of an avatuma. Mashenk and a klicheres, even if it touches a mess and becomes contact with a mess, it doesn't have any special dinim. It doesn't have any special dinim as opposed to becoming tamei from any other avatuma. Nachamol klicheres shenoga b'mes oisha yime beil is tamei. But ve'enim mitame, this klicheres cannot go ahead and be mitame liyadam v'lei klicheres acher v'lei shara kelim. She'en klicheres nasa avatuma leilam. A klicheres can never become an avatuma. Lei b'mes, not when it touches a mess. And v'lei b'shar tumas, there's no musig of a klicheres becoming an avatuma. V'zeu din teira afal b'shu Kabbalah. Even though be'emes is based on Kabbalah, but nevertheless it has a din of din teira that a klicheres is not go any more than a rishon l'tumah. Klicheres, no matter, even if it touches, comes in the contact with a mess, it has a din of a rishon l'tumah. Now, halacha zayin, zeh klal gadol b'tumas. Kol avatuma, anything that's an avatuma. Now there are various different avatumas, but one of the avatumas are also something that touched a mess, an adam or a keli that touched a mess, certainly on a minateiradika level, which the Rambam calls, it was before Divri Kabbalah. Kol avatuma is mitami adam or mitami b'godim v'kelim. An avatuma could always be mitami adam, and it could also be mitami b'godim v'kelim. Ben klimatches, ben klishetev, ben klicheres. In other words, klimativ and klishetev means kelim, which you could be table in a mikvah, which we'll learn by Hamshach, and ben klicheres. An avatuma could go ahead and be mitami adam v'kelim. And that's on one hand, and on the other hand also, the chala matami adam v'kelim in the gear, something that is matami adam v'kelim in the gear is ariz avatuma. There's no mitzias of avladatuma which could be matami adam v'kelim in the gear. So Mimela is two ways. It goes both ways. An avatuma could always be matami adam v'kelim, and something that's matami adam v'kelim must be an avatuma. The chol vladatumas, but something that's a vladatuma, which means it became tummy from an avatuma, is mitame echel mashkin. It could go ahead and extend this tumah to echel mashkin. But ve'eni mitame li adam v'kelim. It can be mitame adam and kelim liklicheres v'lishar kelim b'godim. It can be mitame any adam any type of kelim, not a klicheres, not any type of kelim. Halacha ches kol hanigeh ba'av hu hanikrishin. Av was the avatuma, the source of the tumah, and now you're the first going after the av, which we said the rishon could not be mitame kelim. It could only be mitame echel mashkin. Vanigeh b'rishon is nikra sheni. Vanigeh b'sheni nikra shlishi. Vanigeh b'shlishi nikra revi. And v'ashlishin v'shalamatim, and from the rishon onwards is kulan nikraim vladatuma. They're all called the vladatuma. In other words, there's the avatuma, which is the source of the tumah. It's considered the avatuma, and that could go ahead in mitame adam v'kelim, like we just learned. And then there's the vladatuma, something that became tummy from the avatuma, and that could not be mitami adam v'kelim, but it could only be mitami echlin umashkin. Halacha tes kol hamistami machmas hames tumas shiva. Anything that becomes tummy machmas hames tumas shiva bein adam and kelim, who are nikra tmei mes. That's referred to as being Tmei Mes, which included also the things that we learned before. Someone that touched a keli which touched the mess, or a keli that touched an adam which touched the mess, they're all referred to as being Tmei Mes. V'u'av mi'oves atumis, le'inyan tumas truma, u'trumas kachim k'mei shebiyanu. So even though legabe the dinim of Tumas Migdash v'Kadoshim, legabe the din of Einshim, so they don't really have a din of a Tmei Mes, because lepeil, they're not mistami Tumas Shiva, but lepeil, legabe the din of Truma and Kachim, legabe the din of Tumas Truma v'Kachim, they have a din of a Tmei Mes. So anything that comes Tami Tumas Shiva, that's called a Tmei Mes, and that's an Avatuma. In other words, being a Tmei Mes and being an Avatuma is the same thing. You can't be a Tmei Mes and not be an Avatuma. If you're a Tmei Mes, which means that you're Tami Tumas Shiva, so you're also an Avatuma. But it's only Divrei Kabbalah. And Limnis Mimanu, Rishon Sheni, first of all, is being called an Avatuma. So Legabi said something becomes Tami from this Avatuma, so it becomes a Rishon, and the thing that becomes from that is a Sheni, etc. And also Ukidei, Sheyed of Vav, Ukidei, the Tami Odin V'Kelim, B'Maga, Kishar of Atumas. And also, since it's a Tmei Mes, is Metama Odin V'Kelim, it has a din of an Av is Metami Odin V'Kelim, is Metami Odin V'Kelim, B'Maga, Kishar of Atumas. But V'Eini Metama B'Masa. So that's, even though Lepel, this has a din of a Tmei Mes, and it could go ahead and be Metami Odin V'Kelim, but on the other hand, it's not Metami B'Masa. There's no din of Tumas Masa. An MS itself is Metami B'Magu B'Masa, and sometimes by oil as well. So, and not always, but I'll call upon there's a musik of Magu Masa and oil. Masha'enk is something that's a Tmei Mes. A Tmei Mes is never Metami B'Masa. A Tmei Mes is only Metami B'Magu. So, B'Kitzur, a Tmei Mes is Tomi Tumas Shiva, and a Tmei Mes has a din of an Avatuma, and what do we have as a result of it? It's an Avatuma. So if it touches something, that becomes a Rishon L'Tuma, and it also can be Matami Odin V'Kel. Halacha Yud, Kol HaMistami Machmas HaMes Tumas Erev, something that becomes Tommy as a result of the mess Tumas Erev, in other words, it already reached the point where it has a din of an Avatuma, and now what's becoming Tommy from it is only Tumas Erev, is Hu Vladatuma. That's a Vladatuma. That's called a Vladatuma. Who are Rishon L'Tuma? Ve'efshe sheyiyah haravi min hames rishon l'tuma. K'mi shebiyarnu le'inyan truma v'kachim. As far as truma v'kachim is concerned, you could have a metzias that only the fourth item, which was touched, has a din of rishon l'tuma. Like we said, if you have a mess, and then you have a keli that touches the mess, and then you have the adam that touches the keli, and then you have the keli that touches the adam. So all three of them are going to have a din of a tmei mess, and all three of them will be tami tumas shiva, and they'll be matame adam v'kelim. Now the fourth item, that's going to be a din of a rishon l'tuma. The fourth item that's going to touch this keli that touched the adam, that touched the keli, that touched the mess, so that'll have a din of a rishon l'tuma. Halacha Yudalef. Adam v'kelim shenitmu b'maga eretz ha'am ubeis ha'pras ebu masor. So we're dealing now over here with tumas derabon. We learned before that there were ovis at tumas derabon. Now from the ovis at tumas derabon is eretz ha'am ubeis ha'pras. So Adam Mikalim Shenitmu b'maga Eretz Am, by touching Eretz Am, ubeis hapras ebu masoil, because they're metami b'maga u'b'masa. They're not metami b'oil. We're not choishish that there's a mess that could be metami b'oil. We're only choishish that maybe there's an etzim keseda. Oi, another case, b'maga dam tfusa. Or if you touch dam tfusa means you have dam which was mixed. Part of the dam came out before he died, and part of the dam came out after he died. It was mixed. So that's dam tfusa. So that's also mitami midrabon, or the girl of the defik, or if he touched the girl of the defik, a be'oholim, or he was mile on the girl of the defik. V'chein adam shenitma b'masa dam tfusa. If a person carried dam tfusa, so all of these cases, harei lukulam v'chol kiyetzvem oves tumish or very safer. You know, just like when you touch a mess, you become an avatuma. You become a tmei mess, you become an avatuma. So al derech zeh, when you touch any of these things, or if by Beneged Dam Tfusi you carried it, so the kalim that you touched in Eretz Amim, Beis HaPras, or you carried them, or you touched Dam Tfusa, or Gel V'Defik, or you were mile on a Gel V'Defik, or you carried Dam Tfusa, all of these cases you become an Avatuma Midrabanan. V'chein HaBgodim HaMistam Machmeselu, if a beged becomes tummy by coming into contact with any of these obvious Atumim Midrabanan, is begodim that became tummy as a result of these are tumas shiva, because if they come in contact with them, they become Tumas Shiva, is Kulin obvious Atuma Shul Devri Sefer. They all have a din of an Avatuma Midrabon. Halacha Yud Beis. Ha'oil atzmei ha'mayil al atuma. There is the actual oil. In other words, we speak about tumas oil. We're speaking about one of the ways of tumas oil is if you have a mess, and that mess is under an oil together with another adam or with a keli. So the keli or the adam, which are under the same oil as the mess, becomes tummy. Here the Rambam is talking about the oil itself, that the actual oil should become tummy. So the Rambam says, "Oil atzmei ha'mayil al atuma." The actual oil which is being mal al atuma, aval bishali nagabe tuma, the tuma didn't actually touch the oil. Nevertheless, hariu tami tuma shiva min atera. Varehu kibgodim shinogu b'mes, as if the bgodim would have touched the mess. So the fact that this oil was mal al atuma, also the oil becomes tummy. Shenamar v'hizal oil. So we see that the oil becomes tumah. Now we're going to learn over here that only certain things are called oil. We learn out from the pasuk that the pasuk says by the Mishkan that it's called oil. Vayifris is oil. Ala Mishkan. So we learn out that the things that were spread over the Mishkan are called oil, and anything which is similar to those things which were spread on the Mishkan is also called an oil. So on the Mishkan you had the Urias, you had the Urias which were made out of wool and Urias Izim. So mainly you have something that's woven fabric, and also you have something that's made out of Izim, which is the sar of Izim, which is called sak, when something is made out of, material is made out of the hair of Izim, or hair b'chlal, that's called a sack. And there's also oir. There was oir's tchoshim, so they were also spread over the Mishkan, and they all are considered oil. And Memela, since they're all considered oil, so there's a musig of tumas oil. In other words, from Vihizal oil, we see that the oil becomes tummy. And from Vayisras oil ala Mishkan, we learn out what's called an oil. What's called an oil. Now, we just have to add over here that the Rambam knows, even though the Rambam is going to say that certain things are called an oil, and other things are not called an oil, that's only when you want to become tummy only because it's an oil. There's something that's an oil, it doesn't have a din of a keli. It's not really a keli. It's the only thing is the reason why it's functioning as an oil. So then there's certain tanoim when this oil is makabel tumah, when it's not makabel tumah. Masha'enkin, if this oil, the thing that's spread over the mess and the person, for example, is mamish a keli, it's not just an oil, it's actually a keli. So then it's always makabel tumah. Notice all these hagbolas of when the oil is makabel tumah is only when the oil is not a keli. It's only functioning as an oil. So then you say that there are hagbolas what's called an oil. But if the oil is makabel tumah, so just like any keli which is makabel tumah, if it comes in contact with the mess, becomes tumah. So al derez any keli which is makabel tumah and it's a mile on the mess also is makabel tumah. Yeah. So the Ram says is a nachamot. Let's read again. Halach Yudais. Ha'oil atzmi ha'mayil al atuma, aval bishuli nogu b'tuma, arei tumah tuma shiva min atera, v'arei kibgod mishnogu b'mes, shunama v'hizal oil. So from here we see that the oil is makabel tumah. B'med dvarim amurim, when do we say that the oil is makabel tumah? B'shahoyel oil beged, when the oil was a beged over here means it was woven, it was a woven fabric, a sack, or it was something that was made out of hair, it was something made out of hair similar to the Urias Izim, Oy kli eitz, or it was something that was a kli eitz, it was a keli made out of wood, and as the Ramara brings, that any keli, when the Ram says kli eitz, because Behemshe we're going to have a ma'aser with pishton, but the Ram's l'chura kli eitz means any keli, or it was made out of skin, it was something leather. So Be'emes, it's not really, the Ram l'chura, the way we just said, is not mamish, this l'chura, the diuk haloshin is not so clear. Because l'chura, there's kama dinim. There's one din that any cloth, even if that cloth doesn't have a din of a beged, it didn't have a beged, the Ramar brings from a sefer, l'chura, the Urias did have a din of a beged. Brings that the Urias didn't have a din of a beged, which is a dvar chidush. So b'shahaya oil beged, if it was a beged, it was cloth that didn't have a din of a keli, a sack, a klietz, but klietz does have a din of a beged, of a keli, a air. So l'chura, it's not the same inyan, because by oir and sack and beged is even if it doesn't have a din of a keli. Mashenkin klietz is dafke if it does have a din of a keli. But I'll call upon it. Vamed dvar mamurim b'shoya oil beged a sack a klietz oir, and that din of oir is echad er behema v'chaya ben amutarim lachila ben asurim lachila, regardless of where this oir came from. Shenamar, how do we learn now these dinim that the oil has to be from this material? Shenamar vayifres is oil ala mishkan. So Memela, we learn out in kari oil, what's called oil, ela orik, if something that was woven, and the air, or it's leather kimishka. So mele, so if it's a beged, or if it's a sack, which is also woven, or it's oil, so then it has a din of the mishkan. Avalim hoya oil nisarim shalates. However, if the oil, the covering was made out of planks of wood, kigen atikra, or v'amachzelis, or kiyetzbem, or just a mat, eishal ye'etzem, or was made out of bone, eishal matches, metal, or hareza tor. So then it's tor. In other words, it has to be either beget, sack, or oil. That's the vital. Then the Ram continues, vein tzorich leimer shem hoya binyan, if it was attached to the ground, so bechlal it's not mekabel tumah, so it's certainly shutor. So in other words, in order for the oil to be mekabel tumah, the vital we're learning it has to be either a beged or a sack or an oil. And we're learning that out from the Mishkan, because the Mishkan, over here it says ve'iza al oil, and over here it says vayifris oil. So from the Mishkan we're learning out what's called oil. And v'chol mokim shenamar habayis tamei einei lo'odem v'kelim shebechol habayis. Whenever it says habayis tamei, it doesn't mean the actual bayis is tamei. The bayis is not tamei, because the bayis is mechubel lekarka. But rather the odem and the kelim which are in the bayis is tamei. Then the Rambam continues, which ve'ein lecho yetzim ino eitz shumistami tumisi holim elo pishtin bulvad. Now earlier the Rambam said oy klietz. Now the Rambam is saying ve'ein lecho yetzim ino eitz shumistami tumisi holim elo pishtin bulvad. So the pshat is that pishton is mistami even if it's not a keli. If something is a keli, so then it's mistami without having the special din. Even a klietz is mistami. He said before a klietz is mistami. Then he said that nesorim are not mistami. So what's the pshat? Pshat is klietz, since it's a keli, so a keli is mekabel tumah. So if a keli is mekabel tumah, it's mekabel tumah as an oil as well. Now, however, nesorim, which is not a keli, so elamai, you want it to be mekabel tumah al din oil. It's not mekabel tumah al din oil. Because al din oil, to be mekabel tumah, it has to be either a beged, or it has to be sak, or it has to be clear. However, by pishton, there's a special din, and there's a limud, the Gemara over there in Shabbos, that there's a special limud that we learn now that a pishton, even though it's yotzim and eitz, but nevertheless, it has a din of an oil legabi that is mekabel tumah. And the reason is because in the Mishkan there was also pishton, I'll call upon him. But we learn it out from a limud over there. So ein lecho yetzim and eitz. There's regular eitz which is not a keli. It's not so glatik the lashon over here. The lashon is not so clear what we're saying over here. But l'chura, that's the pshat. When something is a keli, so then it's mekabel tumah regardless. And if something is not a keli, so then if it's beged or sak or oir, it's also mekabel tumah, and then also pishton. So ein lecha yetzim and eitz shemitztam tumah sehol and oz mitztam outside din oil only ala pishton belvad when the pishton is not a keli. Halacha yid gimel begodim hanoigim b'mes is afal pi shein kimes l'tami acherim shenogu by tumah shiva. We learned before that cherev areu kechol. So this keli has a din of the mess that it's mitami acherim tumah shiva. Aber einon kimes l'tami ba'el b'masa. Whereas a mess has three ways of being mitami: b'mago, b'maso, ba'el. So this keli, which became tamei from the mess, even though it has a din of a mess, legabe that it's mitami tumah shiva, but it doesn't have a din of a mess to be mitami tumas masa ba'el. Shamasa lemes atzme einim befurish. It really doesn't say any place clearly in the Torah that a mess is matame tumas masa. And really, where do we learn it out from? We learn it out from oil. We learn it out from a kalvachemer. If it's matame, we learn it from nevela. Madach nevela, which is part of the kalvachemer, is nevela is only matame tumas erev, and it's not matame tumas eil. Nevertheless, matame tumas masa. So a mess mikolshkin. So I call upon a masa lemes atzme einim befurish. K'mei Ubetumas oil hu emer adam kiyomus ba'el. So we learn out that dafkan adam kiyomus ba'el. So therefore it's pashut that even though we say cherev areu kechol, but lepel is not matame tumas el. Now that is not matame tumas masa, because tumas masa even for a mess is a davar einim befurish b'teir. I'll call upon him the din that cherev areu kechol doesn't too often should matame tumas masa and tumas el. Lefichach hanoi si begodim. Shenogu b'mes and v'lein nogabem. You only carry those begodim and you didn't touch the begodim, or v'chol amal aleim, or you were mal in those begodim, or shehilu olav, or they were mal on you. Shahayu ima ba'el, or you were together with the oil. Those the three ways of tumas eil is nevertheless a rizator, because a keli which is nogab b'mes, even though it has a din of an avi satuma that it could be mitame on other v'keli to become an avatuma and mitame tumas shiva. But nevertheless, it's not metame b'maga. It's not metame b'maso be'el. It's only metame b'oil b'maga. V'chein Odom shenitmo b'mes, a person that was nitmo b'mes, and now we're saying that when that person nitmo b'mes and he touches kalim, so those kalim become tumas shiva. But nevertheless, if he was hel ala kalim, on Odom shenitmo b'mes and he was mile ala kalim, is harei and terin she'ein tmei mes metame ela b'maga b'lvad. Something became tummy from a mess. The mess is metame b'maga b'maso be'el, but something that became tummy from a mess is only metame b'maga b'maso b'lvad. Halacha Yudalit. Hames eini mitkame mishkov umeshev betachtov, and also lei madov me'al gabav. The din is that a nida, a ledes, a zova, they're all metame mishkov umeshev, which means that if they're sitting on something, so even though they're not actually touching the item that they're sitting on, there could be 10 mattresses, and they're sitting on the top one, or 10 sheets, and they're sitting on the top one, and they're touching only the top one. So all of them become tummy, and they become avatum really, als tumas mishkav umeshev. And that's din min ha-teira. The Rabbanan, there's another din, that if something on top of them, even though they're not touching it, so that also becomes tummy mid Rabbanan. That's tumas madof. So the thing they're touching becomes tummy min ha-teira. But the other item, which is sitting on them, which is lying on them, that's on top of them, is called tumas madof, and that's tummy mid Rabbanan. By a mess, these two dinim don't apply. There's no din of tumas mishkav umeshev by a mess, and there's no din of tumas madof by a mess. Now a mess, there's another din. There's a din of tumas oil. So if the mess is being mile on an item, so then sometimes we say that the tumah bikazva ela bikazva yeredis. So that the tumah goes up wherever on top of the mess, and it goes down under the mess in certain cases. But certain cases you don't say tumah bikazva ela, tumah bikazva yeredis. So then you don't have the din of tumas mishkav umeshev. Halacha Yudal. Hames eini metami mishkav umeshev mitachtav. And also v'lei madav me'al gabav. Elo echad keli she'iga b'mes mitzidei. If you touch a keli from the side, eishoya tachtav, or the keli was under you, me'al gabav on top of you. Either way, it has always the same din. The fact that it was under you doesn't change anything. Ketzad. Asora b'godim zel gabi zev. You have 10 b'godim, one on top of the other. V'hames l'mayla. And there's vasora b'godim achirim al gabi mumayla. So, but if it would be, let's say a zova, so you would tell all of them avatuma. Mashenkin, the mess is beged on the gear, the actual beged which he's touching, say on top of him, say under him. Vabeged asheni shenoga beged shenoga and the second beged which is touching that beged which touched him is named to Mashiva. They're all tummy to Mashiva. Because we said based on the din of cherev areu kachol. So the first keli becomes like the mess, and the second keli becomes also tummy from that keli. Avashlishi, the third keli is tummy to maserev, is only tummy to maserev. Bein shel ma'ila, bein shel mata. Side the one that's on top, side the one that's on the bottom. There's no din of tumas madav, and there's no din of tumas mishkav. So memela, it's only a din of maga. So the first keli the mess touched became tummy tumas shiva, and it became a din like the avi avesa tumah. The second keli also became tummy tumas shiva because lepel is keilu, it touched the mess, and now the third keli becomes a rishon l'tumah, etc. The third keli becomes a rishon l'tumah, and male is only tumah to maserev. By shlishi tumah to maserev, in shemayel ben shomata. V'aravi u'min aravi l'mata, u'min aravi l'mayla kulam teir. So they're all torah because lepel a rishon l'tumah can be matami kelim. So mele, since the third keli, which came from the mess, so it has a din of a rishon l'tumah, it's only tumah to maserev. So mele, so the keli that it touches doesn't become tummy. That's talking about a mess. Masha'enkim b'matami mishkav v'meshav, k'meshav yizbar b'mkemi. So by matami mishkav v'meshav, all of them become an avatumah, and the ones on top also all become tummy. It's a special din midrabban tumas madaf. Masha'enkim by a mess, there's no din lot of matami mishkav v'meshav, not a tumas madaf. Now, b'amed dvarim amurim shekol abgodim yakelim shetachlu v'shel mayla mimanu teirim. We're saying there's no din of tumas mishkav, there's no din of tumas madaf. Is k'shelehoshisham tumah rutzutza. We're going to learn later that if a tumah, there's a musa called tumah rutzutza, which means tumah which is kvetched, and then you say that the tumah is because ve'ela, because ve'yeredis. Everything on top of the tumah, the tumah is tumah, and anything on the bottom of the tumah is tumah. Over here, we're talking obviously in a case where there's no din of tumah rutzutza. in other words, it finds itself in whatever the situation is, that there's no din of tumor tzutza, and also relate to maseil, and there was no tumor sale. Oi sheyemavdul b'nei uvin akelim evan k'mishi yizbar b'mkem. So then, in other words, to avoid that there shouldn't be an issue of tumor tzutza or tumor sale, so then we have to have certain cases. Masha'inkin, the ikku, what the Rambam is bringing out over here is that there's no tumas mishka v'meshav and there's no tumas maduf.